Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she crouched behind the concrete barrier, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the sound of simulated gunfire. The training exercise had started 20 minutes ago, and already she knew she was failing. Again. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the training ground at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, where she and 19 other recruits were attempting what their instructors called a basic combat simulation. For Sarah, there was nothing basic about it. Every movement felt clumsy, every decision seemed wrong, and every time she tried to advance, she found herself pinned down by the opposing team's superior positioning. "Martinez, what are you doing back there?" Instructor Petty Officer Williams's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Your team is waiting for covering fire!" Sarah checked her weapon for the 100th time, knowing it was loaded with paintball rounds, but somehow still feeling unprepared. She had joined the Navy 6 months ago with dreams of becoming an intelligence specialist, but the physical training requirements meant she had to excel in combat exercises too. So far, excellence seemed as distant as the moon. She took a deep breath and sprinted from her position toward the next barrier. Within seconds, 3 paintball rounds splattered across her vest. The umpire's whistle blew, indicating she was dead and had to return to the starting position. Her teammates looked at her with expressions ranging from disappointment to barely concealed frustration. This was the 3rd exercise this week where Sarah's performance had cost her team valuable points. During Monday's urban warfare simulation, she had gotten confused in the mock building layout and accidentally led her squad into an ambush. Wednesday's beach assault exercise had gone even worse when she dropped her weapon while trying to navigate through the surf, leaving her defenseless for crucial minutes. As the current exercise continued without her, Sarah sat on a wooden bench and watched her teammates work together with a coordination she seemed incapable of achieving. Jennifer Walsh, who had enlisted the same day as Sarah, moved through the course like she had been born for this. Her movements were fluid and confident, and she seemed to anticipate what would happen next before it actually occurred. "You're thinking too much," Jennifer had told her after the Monday disaster. "Combat is about instinct, not analysis." But Sarah couldn't turn off her analytical mind. She approached every situation like a puzzle to be solved, considering multiple variables and potential outcomes. While this made her excellent at the classroom portions of their training, it left her paralyzed during fast-moving exercises where split-second decisions meant the difference between success and failure. The exercise ended with Sarah's team finishing dead last. As the other recruits gathered around Instructor Williams for the debriefing, Sarah hung back, already knowing what would be said. Her individual performance scores were consistently at the bottom of the class, and she had overheard 2 instructors discussing whether she had what it took to complete the program successfully. "Today's lesson is about adapting to unexpected situations," Williams announced to the group. "In real combat, your carefully planned strategies will fall apart within the first 30 seconds. The teams that performed well today were the ones that could adjust their tactics on the fly and support each other when things went wrong." Sarah felt the weight of those words. She had been so focused on following the predetermined plan that when circumstances changed, she couldn't adapt quickly enough. Her teammates had tried to adjust around her limitations, but there was only so much they could compensate for before her performance started dragging everyone down. After the debriefing, Sarah walked alone toward the barracks, her gear bag feeling heavier with each step. The California evening was cooling down, and other recruits were heading to the mess hall for dinner, laughing and discussing the day's exercises with the easy camaraderie that comes from shared success. She had always been the type of person who succeeded through preparation and hard work. In high school, she had been valedictorian through careful study and meticulous note-taking. In college, she had graduated summa cum laude by approaching every assignment with the same methodical precision. But military training demanded something different, something she wasn't sure she possessed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her younger brother Miguel back home in Phoenix. How's Navy life treating you, sis? Bet you're already the best in your class. The irony made her want to cry. Her family was so proud of her decision to serve, and they had no idea how badly she was struggling. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling while her roommate Jennifer slept peacefully nearby. Tomorrow would bring another round of combat exercises, and she knew that unless something changed dramatically, she would continue to fail. The thought of being dropped from the program and sent home in disgrace made her stomach twist with anxiety. She had worked too hard to get here to give up now. Growing up in a working-class family, military service had represented not just a career opportunity, but a chance to prove herself capable of something significant. Her parents had sacrificed to support her education, and joining the Navy was her way of both serving her country and building a stable future for herself. But wanting something desperately didn't make it achievable. Sarah had read every manual, studied every tactical scenario, and practiced every drill until she could perform them perfectly in controlled conditions. Yet when the pressure was on, and real decisions had to be made quickly, her mind seemed to freeze up completely. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. Tomorrow's exercise would be different. Somehow, she would find a way to break through whatever mental barrier was holding her back. She had to, because the alternative was accepting that she simply wasn't cut out for military service, and that was a possibility she refused to consider. The next morning arrived with the sharp blast of réveillé at 0500 hours. Sarah had slept poorly, her dreams filled with failed exercises and disappointed faces. She dressed quickly in her combat utilities and joined the formation outside the barracks, where Instructor Williams was already waiting with his characteristic stern expression. "Today's exercise will be different," he announced to the assembled recruits. "We're running a hostage rescue simulation in the urban training facility. Teams of 4 will have 45 minutes to clear a 3-story building and secure the hostages without any casualties." Sarah's heart sank. Urban combat was her weakest area, combining all the elements that gave her the most trouble: rapid decision-making, close quarters maneuvering, and coordinating with teammates in confined spaces. The previous week's urban exercise had been a complete disaster, and she knew her teammates remembered it too. As Williams divided them into teams, Sarah found herself grouped with Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Thompson, and David Kim. They were all solid performers who had consistently scored in the top half of the class. She could see the barely concealed concern in their eyes as they realized they would be carrying her dead weight once again. "Listen up, Martinez," Jennifer said as they gathered to plan their approach. "Just stick close to me and follow my lead. Don't overthink it." Marcus nodded in agreement. "We'll take the lead positions. You and Kim can cover the rear and watch for flanking movements." It was a diplomatic way of keeping Sarah in a support role where she could do the least damage to their chances. The team spent 20 minutes studying the building layout and developing their entry strategy. Sarah contributed several observations about potential ambush points and escape routes, demonstrating the tactical knowledge she had absorbed from countless hours of study. But everyone knew that theoretical knowledge and practical application were two very different things. When their turn came, Sarah's team approached the building with practiced caution. Jennifer and Marcus moved to the front entrance, while Sarah and Kim positioned themselves to cover the side exits. The exercise began with the sharp crack of a starting pistol, and immediately Sarah felt the familiar surge of anxiety that accompanied live training. The first floor clearing went smoothly. Jennifer's team moved through the rooms with efficient precision, while Sarah maintained her position outside, watching for any opposing team members trying to escape or reinforcements attempting to enter. For once, her role was clear and simple, and she executed it without any major mistakes. But when they reached the second floor, the situation became more complex. The building layout forced them to split into pairs, with Sarah partnering with David Kim, while Jennifer and Marcus took the other corridor. This was exactly the kind of independent decision-making situation where Sarah typically fell apart. "Stairwell clear," Kim whispered into his radio as they advanced toward the first room. "Moving to secure the northeast corner." Sarah's hands were sweating inside her gloves as they approached the door. Through her earpiece, she could hear Jennifer's team engaging the opposing force in the other corridor, their paintball weapons creating a steady rhythm of artificial gunfire. The sound made her heart race, even though she knew it was just training. Kim signaled for her to cover him while he checked the door for booby traps. This was standard procedure that Sarah had practiced dozens of times, but suddenly she couldn't remember the proper positioning. Should she be watching the corridor behind them or focusing on potential threats from the room ahead? Her hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. As Kim pushed open the door, an opposing team member who had been hiding in an adjacent room fired several rounds that caught Sarah completely off guard. The paintball rounds splattered across her chest and shoulder, marking her as eliminated from the exercise. "Damn it! Martinez!" Kim's frustration was audible, even though he tried to keep his voice down. "You were supposed to be watching our six." Sarah felt the familiar wave of shame and self-doubt wash over her. Once again, her inability to react quickly under pressure had compromised her team's mission. She trudged back to the observation area where eliminated participants waited, watching through windows as the exercise continued without her. The pattern repeated itself over the next 2 weeks. No matter what role Sarah was assigned or what type of exercise they ran, she found ways to make critical mistakes at crucial moments. During a night navigation course, she led her team in the wrong direction and they finished an hour behind schedule. In a weapons maintenance drill under pressure, she assembled her rifle incorrectly and it jammed during the combat portion. Her confidence was eroding with each failure, and she could see the effect it was having on her teammates. They had stopped including her in their strategic discussions, instead giving her simple tasks that required minimal decision-making. While this reduced the impact of her mistakes, it also made her feel increasingly isolated from the group. The breaking point came during a beach assault exercise that was designed to simulate a real amphibious landing. Sarah's team was tasked with securing a machine gun nest that had been set up in a concrete bunker overlooking the beach. It was a complex operation that required precise timing and coordination between multiple elements. Sarah was assigned to carry the radio and maintain communication between her squad and the supporting units offshore. It should have been a straightforward job, but when the exercise began, everything went wrong almost immediately. The opposing team had changed their defensive strategy from the briefing, positioning additional personnel in locations that weren't shown on the maps. As Sarah's team advanced up the beach, they came under heavier fire than expected and were forced to take cover behind a row of wooden barriers. "We need to call for suppressing fire from the boats," Jennifer shouted over the sound of paintball rounds impacting around them. "Martinez, get on the radio!" Sarah fumbled for the radio handset, her fingers slipping on the wet plastic. The combination of physical exertion, stress, and the constant noise of simulated combat had overwhelmed her ability to think clearly. She managed to establish contact with the offshore support team, but when she tried to relay their position and request fire support, her words came out in a confused jumble. "Say again your last transmission," the voice on the radio responded. "Unable to understand your request." By the time Sarah managed to clearly communicate their situation, precious minutes had been lost. The opposing team had used that time to reposition their forces, and when the suppressing fire finally arrived, it was too late to be effective. Sarah's team was systematically eliminated as they tried to advance without adequate support. As they walked back to the starting position, none of her teammates said anything, but their disappointment was obvious. Sarah knew that her radio work had been the critical failure point that doomed their mission. The technical aspects of operating the radio weren't difficult, but her inability to perform under pressure had once again let everyone down. That evening, as Sarah sat alone in the mess hall, She overheard two instructors discussing the day's exercises at a nearby table. They weren't deliberately trying to be overheard, but their voices carried in the relatively quiet dining area. "Martinez is a problem," one of them said. "She's got the academic knowledge, but she can't execute when it matters. I'm starting to think she doesn't have what it takes for operational assignments." "Give her a little more time," the other instructor replied. "Sometimes people just need to find their confidence." "Time is one thing we don't have much of," the first instructor said. "She's been here 3 months and hasn't shown any real improvement. At some point, we have to make a decision about whether she belongs in this program." Sarah's appetite disappeared completely. The conversation confirmed her worst fears about how her performance was being evaluated. She was running out of time to prove herself, and despite all her efforts, she seemed to be getting worse rather than better under the constant pressure. 2 days later, everything changed in a way Sarah never could have anticipated. The morning began like any other, with the usual formation and briefing for the day's training schedule. But as the recruits were preparing to move to their first exercise location, Instructor Williams made an unexpected announcement. "We have a special observer with us today," he said, his tone carrying more respect than usual. "Commander Jack Harrison from SEAL Team 5 will be evaluating our training procedures and may provide some additional instruction." Sarah had heard of Commander Harrison through the base grapevine. He was a legend in the special operations community, with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for developing innovative training methods that had been adopted throughout the Navy. The fact that he was personally observing their exercise meant that everyone would be under intense scrutiny. As the recruits moved toward the training area, Sarah caught her first glimpse of Commander Harrison. He was smaller than she had expected, probably around 5 feet 8 inches tall, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in harsh environments. What struck her most was how quietly he moved and observed, taking notes on a small pad without drawing attention to himself. The morning exercise was a squad-level assault on a fortified position, similar to dozens of scenarios Sarah had failed over the previous months. As her team prepared their approach, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Having Commander Harrison watching made the pressure even more intense, and she knew that another poor performance might be the final nail in the coffin of her military career. The exercise began badly for Sarah's team. Within the first 10 minutes, Marcus had been eliminated by accurate fire from the defensive position, and Jennifer was pinned down behind insufficient cover. Sarah and Kim were supposed to provide flanking support, but the terrain was more difficult than it had appeared during the briefing. As they moved through a series of drainage ditches that were meant to provide concealed approaches to the target, Sarah found herself falling behind. The physical demands of low crawling through muddy water while carrying full equipment were pushing her to her limits, and she could feel her focus beginning to fragment under the combined stress of exhaustion and time pressure. "Martinez, we need to pick up the pace," Kim whispered urgently. "Jennifer's running out of ammunition and we're her only backup." Sarah tried to move faster, but her equipment kept catching on the sides of the ditch and she was struggling to maintain proper spacing behind Kim. She knew that she was once again becoming the weak link that would cause her team's mission to fail, but she couldn't seem to make her body respond the way she needed it to. Then she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Commander Harrison had apparently left his observation position and was moving through the training area, though Sarah couldn't understand why he would be getting so close to an active exercise. She glanced back and saw him crouched low, moving through the same ditch she and Kim were using. When he reached her position, Commander Harrison didn't say anything at first. He simply observed her technique for a few moments, watching how she was trying to navigate through the difficult terrain. Sarah expected him to point out her mistakes or offer technical corrections, but instead he moved closer and spoke just 2 words, so quietly that only she could hear them. "Stop thinking." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. In those 2 simple syllables, Commander Harrison had identified the core problem that had been sabotaging her performance for months. She had been approaching every exercise like an academic problem to be solved, analyzing variables and considering options, when what was needed was immediate, instinctive action. Something fundamental shifted in Sarah's mind at that moment. Instead of trying to calculate the optimal path through the remaining ditch, she simply started moving. Instead of worrying about whether her spacing was perfect or her technique was textbook correct, she focused on the immediate goal of reaching the assault position before Jennifer ran out of covering fire. The change was immediate and dramatic. Sarah found herself moving through the terrain with a fluidity she had never experienced before. Her equipment stopped catching on obstacles because she was reacting to them instinctively rather than consciously planning each movement. Her breathing became more controlled because she wasn't wasting mental energy on constant self-evaluation. When she and Kim reached their assault position, Sarah didn't hesitate or look for confirmation from her teammate. She could see the defensive position's weak point clearly, and she moved to exploit it without overthinking the tactical implications. Her suppressing fire was accurate and well-timed, allowing Jennifer to advance from her pinned position. The exercise concluded with Sarah's team successfully capturing the objective in their best time of the entire training cycle. As they regrouped at the finish point, Jennifer looked at Sarah with genuine surprise and approval. "What happened back there?" Jennifer asked. "That was like watching a completely different person. You moved like you knew exactly what you were doing." Sarah wasn't sure how to explain what had changed. Commander Harrison's 2 words had somehow unlocked a different way of approaching combat situations, one that relied on training and instinct rather than conscious analysis. She had stopped fighting against her own mind and instead learned to trust the preparation she had already completed. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah's performance underwent a complete transformation. The analytical skills that had previously paralyzed her in combat situations became an asset during planning phases, allowing her to contribute valuable insights during mission briefings. But when the action started, she had learned to switch off the analytical part of her mind and trust her training. Her teammates noticed the change immediately and began including her more fully in their tactical discussions. Her instructors, who had been preparing to recommend her removal from the program, started using her improvement as an example for other struggling recruits. Commander Harrison observed several more exercises before completing his evaluation, but he never spoke directly to Sarah again. She learned later that his visit had been part of a broader assessment of training methods and that her sudden improvement had influenced his recommendations for how combat instruction should be modified. On the final day of the training cycle, Sarah's class participated in a comprehensive exercise that tested all the skills they had developed over the previous months. It was designed to be the ultimate challenge, combining elements of urban combat, beach assault, hostage rescue, and equipment maintenance under extreme time pressure. Sarah's performance during that final exercise exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. She moved through each phase with confidence and precision, making split-second decisions that proved tactically sound and supporting her teammates effectively. When the exercise concluded, her team had achieved the highest score in the training cycle's history. As the recruits prepared to graduate and move on to their specialized training programs, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that moment in the drainage ditch, when Commander Harrison had spoken those 2 transformative words. She had learned that sometimes the biggest obstacles to success are the ones we create in our own minds, and that breaking through those barriers often requires the wisdom to know when to stop trying so hard. The graduation ceremony was held on a sunny California morning, with families and friends gathered to celebrate the completion of basic combat training. As Sarah walked across the stage to receive her certificate, she spotted Commander Harrison in the audience, observing quietly as he had during the exercises. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and he gave her an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. In that simple gesture, Sarah understood that her transformation had been noticed and appreciated by someone whose opinion mattered deeply in the military community. Years later, as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez led her own teams through challenging missions around the world, she would often remember Commander Harrison's lesson about the power of trusting instinct over analysis. And whenever she encountered young personnel who were struggling with similar challenges, she would find opportunities to share those same two quiet words that had changed the entire trajectory of her military career.